Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with William Wallace Rose. William is a writer, poet, actor, traveler, printmaker, teacher, and translator. He's taught drama in Switzerland, creative writing in the US, and English as a foreign language in the Czech Republic, and he now lives in France, where he's studying and translating contemporary literature in the ancient regional language Occitan. His work has been supported by the Edward F. Albee Foundation. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
William, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Yes, sure. And I'm very excited to be with you. I'm not used to doing this kind of thing, and it's a pleasure and a new experience in some ways. So I'm in my early 70s, and when I retired from my teaching career about 6 years ago, I decided to come to France, where I had lived as a child and as a teenager, and I've always wanted to come back and live in France all through my life. So I was able to fulfill that dream, and a big part of what I've been doing here for the last 6 years is I've been studying the Occitan language, which is the old, very ancient language that was spoken throughout southern France from medieval times up to the present. I've been studying that, and I've been very interested in translating language, as well as reading, speaking, and just kind of being part of the community of Occitan speakers here. So that's one important part about who I am, at least now in my life. And I'll just say also that as a writer, which is what I primarily think of myself as, although I've not published very much, but I've written all through my life, especially journals, which I've been writing since I was 20. And the other part of my real focus right now in my inner life and in my creative life is that I've embarked on a project that I've had for a long time in mind. I'm going back and I'm transcribing all of my journals using AI into text form and rereading it all from the age of 20 onward. It's a very involving, very fascinating process of kind of self-rediscovery, you might say, and just following with interest a lot of the adventures I've had in a rather adventurous and pretty diverse life.
What was it like going back to France after being away so long? Was there a culture shock? Even though you had spent a significant amount of time there, France, like everywhere else, changed during that period. So what was that like?
That's a really good point. Yes, France had changed quite a lot, and so had I. I lived in France the last time as a teenager. I was 18 and 19. I finished high school here. Throughout my life, I've lived in Europe. I've come back. I've visited France. I've lived and taught in Switzerland and in the Czech Republic, or now Czechia. So I'd touched base in France, but I still had a somewhat romanticized view of it and memories from a period of life when I was going through big changes and where being in France was really important to me. So yes, there was culture shock. There was a rediscovery of this country and an ongoing process of learning that I'm still very much involved in, not just improving my skills with the language, but understanding the people better, getting to know the culture, appreciating the culture more. A really interesting process over 6 years of coming face to face again and again with things about France that can be troublesome, that can be jarring to me, uncomfortable. And kind of, in a way, I think I feel myself becoming more French. I understand better what's behind a lot of things. I accept things that used to really bother me.
Do you have any examples of those things that you find troublesome but also revealing?
Well, French people, I would say, and you can't really be totally generalizing, but still, in order to talk about it in some way, you kind of have to. I have had the experience of many French people being very direct in their comments, in their criticism, in their opinions or reactions to things. I think Americans, English speakers, tend to soften our language a lot. and to be more cautious, more careful, more considerate maybe about another person's feelings, or always having more of a readiness maybe to hear what someone else might think or say. I feel like one of the experiences I've had with French people is that they already have a very strong opinion. And if you have a different opinion, they're going to swipe at it. They're going to kind of knock it down or just say directly, oh, I don't think that's true, or that's not the way it is at all. Whereas an American might say, well, I'm not sure I agree entirely with that. I see things a little differently. We always kind of give the other person a certain amount of benefit of the doubt or something. And so there's a kind of direct, harsh quality.
So basically, when you say that you're becoming more French, you mean that you're becoming more rude?
That's part of it. A nicer way to put that would be that I'm not worrying quite as much about how I phrase things or how I mince words. I've always been a pretty sensitive person. I don't necessarily come out and defend myself with all my guns blazing, to put it lightly. So I think I'm just getting a little better at sticking to my point of view, or even, interrupting people. And that's another quality about French conversation that is really kind of hard to get used to, is that people talk over each other a lot. And people tell me that's especially so in the South, but I think it may be more general than that.
That's what, I'm from Morocco, so French colony. So
Mhm.
I'm like, I
Yeah.
feel sometimes, but after the conversation is over, I'm like, oh my God, I talked over a bunch of Americans. This is not right.
Well, we're easy to talk over.
About your journal, you said you're now transcribing it. Can you tell us, when did you start it? How long have you been keeping it?
I started when I was 20. I left Boston in an old Chevy that I bought from my sister, and I drove across the country to Los Angeles to go to college. This was a year after I'd returned from France as a teenager. I'd spent the year at home with my parents in Boston, and then I set off on this great adventure. And I thought, oh, maybe it would be a good idea to keep a logbook, just to have a record of my journey. So I had this little book that I bought, and I started writing every day, and I just never stopped. It became something that I just did. It became a very deep habit, and I'm so glad it did, because I have an incredible record of about 40 books now and counting. So it started, they were just little notebooks. They gradually got bigger, and I finally started using kind of full-size artist sketchbooks, black, with 80 to 100 pages in each one, handwritten. So there's a lot of text. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words, and it covers 50 years. It's very precious to me, and I think that I can make use of it. It's material that I can work with. But my main purpose at this point is primarily just to do an exact transcription of everything, and then see what to be done with it, and to eventually find a publisher for the first parts of it, or, kind of go from there and see where it goes.
Yeah, and can you tell us how you go about learning a new language? How is that affecting your writing, your thoughts? As a multilingual, I think about that a lot.
Well, I had the good fortune to get started early with that, because my family came and spent a year in France when I was 8 years old, which is a perfect time to be immersed in a language. And I also grew up in a family that really valued language and books and reading and writing. And my father was quite interested in languages, and we talked a lot about words and etymology and meanings of words and things like that. So I started learning French early, just by immersion, and I was interested. And then when I came back as a teenager, I studied French for a while in high school, and it always came really easily because I'd had that year of having it planted in my brain. But actually, I'm much more of a listener than a studier of language. I'm musical. There was a lot of music in my family. So I pick things up easily by ear. And that's always my first approach with a language. So French, and then life led me to Switzerland, and I ended up teaching in a Swiss-German boarding school in the Alps. I learned German there, again, largely by listening, but also by studying. And that's what I've done with Occitan as well. When I decided to study this language and study the medieval time that it was born in, which was really my chief interest at the beginning, the troubadours and music, the early music of medieval France, that was my passion. And thankfully, there's a lot of really wonderful music in Occitan and a lot of really wonderful literature to read and enjoy. So it's a pleasure to be immersed in Occitan and to be discovering what an incredibly rich language it is and what a treasure it is.
Can you share a bit more about the history of Occitan and who speaks Occitan, its historical development?
Yeah, I'd love to. I always like to talk about Occitan. It's so interesting, and so few people really know very much about it. So, first of all, it's one of several regional languages, I guess you could say, in France. There's also Breton, the original language spoken in Brittany. There's Alsatian, there's Basque. Anyway, Occitan, however, was, let's say, in about 1100 AD, was just being created in a written form, but it was the vernacular of people all throughout southern France, into northern Italy, into the Pyrenees. It was widely spoken and was for hundreds of years. The troubadour period of literature was when the language first began to really take a literary form, and it was thanks to a community of well-educated nobles who began to write and create a written form. But it was also always spoken by the people more broadly. And all through the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, up until the 19th century, it was spoken by people throughout France, but it was gradually being replaced by French, Northern French, because of the political developments. So the southern France area was conquered by the King of France in the 1200s. It became a vassal to the king. French language began to be just imposed everywhere, as one sees in all kinds of situations in many countries, the way languages developed, certainly in Europe. I won't go on for too long about it, but I do want to stress that the language up until 2 generations ago, or 3 at the most, was still spoken by many, many, many thousands of people. But it was really suppressed by the French government in various ways. They wanted to unify the country around a single language and had the sense that that was really necessary, basically from the time of the revolution on. And they very effectively succeeded in almost eradicating it. Now, there are elders who have spoken it as a first language, but there are fewer and fewer of those. I've spoken to countless people who've said, "Oh, Occitan, my grandparents spoke that at home, but I never learned it." And nowadays, it's spoken still by thousands and thousands of people. The language has greatly evolved, like all languages do. So Old Occitan, as they call it, the language in which the troubadours were writing, already was evolving in the 200 or so years of the troubadour phenomenon, which is quite a long time when you think about it. You could compare it to reading Chaucer. It's that different in structure and in vocabulary and lots of things. But you can certainly see the continuity with modern Occitan. And there are various dialects of it. Linguists describe it as having 5 different basic groups. They're understandable amongst themselves. So there are a lot of ways you can find events or find groups or go to festivals, go to gatherings and speak Occitan with people. But there aren't really places you can go and hear people speaking it out on the street because that's what they speak there. Very few anyway.
And how about music?
Yeah, it's unbelievable how much great music there is. Contemporary music and old music and everything in between. Folk music, folkloric music, rap, hip hop, modern day music. If you look it up on YouTube, you'll find amazing things. And then in the literary world, I was just at a poetry reading last night, and there was a reading of Occitan poetry in Montpellier. Just one example of people gathering to share their writing. There are short stories, there are novels, there are crime novels, science fiction novels, poetry, lots and lots being written. And when I encountered that in my first year at the university, where I did a master's degree finally in Occitan studies, I encountered this writer named Florian Vernet, who is a man in his 80s now, very, very lively. And he's written vast amounts of things in Occitan. He's not the only one, but he's written really interesting things. And I've really got interested in his short stories. And I was listening to your podcast with Hugo dos Santos earlier, and I think you asked him, what makes you decide you want to translate this or that or another thing? And like him, I just fall in love with a piece of work, and I automatically want to translate it. It's just like, that's what I want to do, is make this live in my own language, that other people can appreciate this great, interesting, fun, crazy writing. I have an example which I can read whenever it's the right moment to do so, of a text by Florian Vernet that I translated as part of my studies.
Sure, we'd love to hear it. We can actually do that now.
Yeah, this is from a short story of his. I translated it as "In This Line of Work." And I thought it might be interesting just to read a few sentences in Occitan so that people can hear what it sounds like. And then I'll read a part of this story. It's about a hired killer, a gangster, essentially. It's kind of a comic crime short story. It's funny, but it's dark. And he's on his way to deliver proof to a man who hired him for quite a bit of money that he's completed the killing. He's on his way down from Paris to Marseille. This is in the middle of the story. Era divendres, 10 euros e un pau mai cant ai agantat l'autoruto. Lu rendezvous amb lu client ero previs per 9 euros dessert. Per pas que nous manquessem, eren restat que messonario e sul telefonet, como avion convengut despre la debuto, a 8 euros picantos e aprep car duro se nous mancavam en caro per una razón ou per una autra. There's a bit of Occitan.
Interesting.
It's cool.
Yeah, with an American accent. I'll read a section now. It was Friday, a little after 10 a.m., when I made it to the freeway. I was supposed to meet the client at 9 p.m. To be sure to find each other, we'd arranged from the start that he'd make the call to me at 8 o'clock sharp on my cell phone. And after that, every quarter of an hour if we still hadn't connected for some reason or other. Super organized, this dude. A total tight ass. The type who try to pre-plan everything possible and more. So hyper-cautious, they overthink it and end up passing their jitters on to you. But when you're handling a 30,000 euro job, you can't be too nitpicky. The Paris-Marseille freeway wasn't overly crowded for the 23rd of July. Once past the toll booths, I was tempted to gun it, but with all the speed checks they do these days, like they've got nothing better to do, I decided to keep a light foot on the gas. Best to play it safe. I had more than enough time. So I forced myself to tool along like some geezer, chill, gaping out at the countryside with the AC on, high, and a CD by Tom Waits, who I recommend in case you haven't heard him. Chill. I even stopped every 200 kilometers to fill the tank. Running out of gas would have been idiotic, right? To give the beamer a breather and to double check that everything was A-OK in the ice chest and the trout still cold. Now listen, here's what it means to be jinxed. You trust German automobiles, right? There's none better in mechanics and dependability, so they say. Well, just before Valence, the needle on the heat gauge starts to rise, so I ease up more on the gas. But at 110 kilometers per hour, only 110 in a BMW, the needle's still going up on me, up and up. Holy shit, tell me the engine's not giving out. Tell me the cylinder head's not about to pop. Not on a practically new BMW with barely 50,000 kilometers. As luck would have it, and that's only a manner of speaking, I make it to a rest area and pull in. What should I do now, stuck here with an appointment 200 kilometers away? I call road service and finally dig up a tow truck. And an hour later, I'm still in Valence. The car's at a BMW dealership, and as I suspected, it's the piece of shit cylinder head that gave out. Just imagine, it's the middle of July, and they have to order the part, and half the workers are on their summer break, and the last loaner car they had was already taken this morning by some Dutch tourists who broke down too. The next time I buy a German car, it'll be a fucking Trabant. I'm so beside myself that the owner of the shop ends up calling the SNCF to book me a seat on the high-speed train to Marseille that stops in Valence and gets into St. Charles Station at 7:38 p.m. The skinny is, I've got no choice but go along, figuring I'll just stay in Marseille a little longer than planned and hoping it won't take a whole month to fix the car. Once I get there, I'll give Zay a call to meet up, and if I can't reach him, because with him you never know, I'll try to get hold of Karina as soon as I've settled things with the client. She'll bitch about how it's been 6 months since she heard a word from me, and she'll sulk to start with, but I know she'll be thrilled to see me. They're all the same. You bone them a few times and they think you're as good as married. Otherwise, I'll figure something else out.
Wow. French culture is coming through. I like it.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks for coming on. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too, and I'm so grateful for your podcast.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.